Yeah, and I think we can utilize technologies like ZK and MPC and other privacy enhancing technologies to help be that bridge. Going through somebody who is a central validator, bringing that information into decentralization doesn't necessarily have to be on chain, but it needs to be in a place where you can interact with that data and prove things about yourself.
Okay, we'll go ahead and kick this off. Guys, welcome. This is pretty much the ending point of Token2049, and excited to have this conversation, this chat. So, well, these guys probably don't need much intro, but I'll give them a chance to roll through it. So, Arthur, you want to give a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure. Arthur Hayes, co-founder of BitMEX, used to be the CEO, now the chief investment officer of my family office, Maelstrom, and I have a large bag of Filecoin waiting for you to pump it.
My name is Alex Page. I started off my career in finance, working at Goldman and other investment banks. Was on the inside of the things that were happening during the last financial crisis because I was in the banks doing work and really saw what was going on inside of banks, how much of an inside game it was, and it was something that didn't sit well with me. But there wasn't really another game in town, and in 2017, Ethereum really got me into Web3 because smart contracts, I saw this ability to code things on chain is really interesting, and that's why I started getting in the space. I was an advisor to a couple of projects, but in 2017, I met a co-founder, Miguel, who had invented NMC technology, which underpins Nillion, the platform that we are building. And so now I'm the CEO of Nillion and a co-founder of Nillion, and Nillion is basically a distributed computation platform that is focused on storing, sharing, and processing high-value data, so data that you want to keep secure in some way, and doing that with the decentralized architecture. And our goal is really to expand the potential of Web3 by adding new use cases, making it easy for people to come on and use high-value data in the Web3 architecture.
Great. So I'm Balaji, former CTO of Coinbase, former general partner Anderson. Wrote a book called The Network State, Wall Street Journal bestseller, and I tweet. I started tweeting again. There you go. All right.
So, when we put together this talk, one of the things that we wanted to explore was obviously a lot's happened over the last year in crypto, and frankly, a lot's happened over the last 5 to 10 years. It seems like every couple of years things shift and they change, and the landscape is different, and it goes from meme coins to infrastructure to something else. And the one thing we wanted to explore this time was, what exists beyond what we see today and what goes beyond the blockchain. There's always been the promise of this technology being something that could lead to all different kinds of things beyond just finance or transactions or, in some cases, art. But I think once the crypto tourists have left, what's left is a contingent of people that actually believe in the technology and what it can do, either be it through the creation of new types of countries or the creation of a new kind of banking system or use cases that stretch beyond sending money back and forth. So, really curious to hear from you guys. Now we sit in 2023. We've seen now in the middle of a bear market, but this technology's come a long way. And sitting in 2023, what do you think we've seen that has found product market fit in, say, the last 5 to 10 years that this technology has really come to life?
I guess I'd say the number one thing that I see is like DeFi, so decentralized finance, has really come into its own. If you could imagine, like my first day in trading was the day that Lehman Brothers went bankrupt in 2008, and I stepped on the trading floor. Head of trading is fucking scurrying around. It's like, you gotta cut Morgan, gotta cut Merrill's, like cutting banks lines, like not sure who is solvent or not. And obviously over the next few weeks, just about every single investment bank essentially failed and got a bailout. We had a similar sort of events in 2022, right, where we had the biggest lenders, one of the biggest exchanges, all go down. And there were no bailouts because you really can't bail anybody out in crypto, yet everything continued to function. And the little itty bitty financial system that we're all building here ticked right along and was perfectly fine. Like imagine what would happen if that had happened in traditional finance, where the government didn't step in and bail out all these banks and whatnot. So I think we have found product market fit. We've demonstrated that we can handle fraud and all sorts of different things and continue to build cool shit.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that on the building of an alternative financial structure, we've found really great fit, and in stablecoins we found really great fit. But I think one of the things that is overlooked when we think about what blockchain and what decentralization has brought in is just the amount of energy, attention, and intelligence that is now focused on cryptography and building consensus mechanisms, and taking what was really, you know, an academic exercise and turning it into technology that actually has an impact on the world. And we have a lot of cryptographers who are focused on this. There's a lot of energy. There's a lot of money. I know it doesn't feel like it in a bear market, but there's a lot of very smart people that are building new things, and they're proving them out by delivering on products. We're building things and doing stuff with these cryptographic primitives, and that is something that is quite unique for the industry. We've gotten a focus of an area that has been really academic, and, you know, instead of going through the exercise of just university research and papers, you know, people are going out and building with it. They're taking new tech that's being invented and new cryptographic primitives and turning them into technology. I think that that's one of the really cool things that has come with the product market fit that we've seen from the finance side.
Yeah, well, you know, I think of, obviously this is a technology, but it's also, you know, blockchains are digital governments in the sense of, you know, property rights. Bitcoin is a new kind of reserve currency, and Ethereum is a new kind of smart contract and contract law. And like something like ENS is a new form of identity. So traditional domains of governments, you know, property rights, contract law, identity, we now have a choice in how we're governed, and you can even hedge. And just like you drive from, let's say, the US and be in Canada 10% of the time and back, you can have 10% of your assets in this different government, or in all these different governments, and then have 90% in your old government. And just the fact that that choice even exists is incredible. That wasn't there before, that we can now experiment with new systems of property rights, contracts, people can opt in. And of course, it's not everything, it's not the physical component, but it's like kind of getting one hand free when you're being pinned down for so long. And then we can maneuver out and get the other hand and get the land. That's the kind of thing I think about. So the product market fit is the new state, right? It's as big as that, and it's as bold as that. We haven't yet seen all of that yet, but that's actually why people are streaming to the new state. Just like they stream from Europe to America, they're streaming from America to the internet and blockchain.
Yeah, I think that point is actually really interesting, because if you think about this, say, new state or what this technology enables, it's almost as though the barriers that we are forced into, say barriers for countries or barriers for companies, they kind of get broken down. And because of this technology, and we saw it initially with money, but then we start to see it in other ways. And so I guess a follow-up question to that would be for all of you, if we are entering, say, this new world that's either decentralized first, or it's a network state or something like that, then how do we deal with things like interoperability, quote unquote, within this context? Or how do we deal with collaboration? You know, typically a country would have collaboration that's forced, or a company, Intel has a collaboration that's forced. But if we're breaking out of that, how does this technology enable that? And what do we kind of see as use cases that become fundamentally important in that kind of new world?
Well, I mean, like the first and the big one, and I still think it's going to be one of the biggest ones, perhaps the biggest one, probably, is Bitcoin as the new digital gold and the thing that governments can't seize. And that property is going to be, it's one of those things where in the early 2010s, you know, I made this analogy before, maybe, I think maybe Arthur and I talked about it, but, you know, people had seen, if you guys remember the Social Network movie, it came out in 2010, and there was no mention of politics in that movie. Nobody mentioned, I mean, even as important as it was to make a movie, nobody mentioned politics at all, right? And yet, a year later, you know, the Arab Spring happened and governments were overthrown. But even still, if you had said that 10 years from then, in 2021, for at least a few days, the most important thing in the world would be whether the President of the United States of America could tweet. Okay, people would still thought that'd be an exaggeration. Oh, come on, you're taking social media too seriously. It's just people tweeting zombies or, you know, their breakfast or something like that. And now, today, we have, you know, the government of El Salvador has Bitcoin as its national currency. Every single bank and government and politician, every technologist, every investor, I shouldn't say every person, but a very large percentage of people in the world have heard of Bitcoin, have heard of cryptocurrency, and so on and so forth. And yet, if I still said, hey, in, you know, 5 or 10 years, the solvency of the government will be determined by whether it has enough Bitcoin, just like, the presidency was determined whether, he could tweet, right? Their access to social media determined whether they had political power. Their access to cryptocurrency will determine whether they retain political power. That still seems like a leap. Just like you could see the Arab Spring and still think that that would come to the center of the political arena rather than being at the edges seemed like a leap. And so I think that we aren't taking this space seriously enough yet, right? The dollar has dropped 5 or 6 orders of magnitude against Bitcoin, right? From 10 cents, $1, $10, $100, $1,000, $10,000. It only has 1 or 2 more to go, 3 maybe, who knows, maybe 5, or 5. And then we're in just a completely new world. And we're building towards that. But it's kind of like with AI, for example, for 52 years, chatbots were kind of getting better. But even in January 2022, somebody wrote an article saying chatbots have failed for 52 years. And then came year 53.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that expanding on top of that and around AI, it is these new infrastructures and technologies that come through that do lead to these big leaps forward. And I think a really important one for Web3 as an ecosystem is going to be around data and how we use data in decentralized architectures. We've decentralized the financial system. We found Bitcoin as really a facet that underpins all of that. But the technologies that come up alongside that decentralize things like how we use data, how we store private data, how we deal with collaboration between either new network states or governments or between organizations. The digital aspects of who we are as individuals is going to become a bigger and bigger part of really the entirety of our identity. And so finding technologies that allow us to secure that but still use that are going to be incredibly important as that just continues to grow. There will reach a point where your digital version of yourself will be more important than the physical version of you. And we've already kind of seen it be more valuable in terms of what we see with like Facebook and how data is used, what the big tech giants have done in collecting and centralizing data. If we're going to get to a place where we have a decentralized state or decentralized ecosystem for people, we're going to need to put data in there as well. And we'll need a way to collaborate on that and work with it.
You guys actually bring up 2 really interesting points, and maybe I'll give something for Arthur to jump in on. But basically, with Bitcoin, it's to put it crudely, it's the idea of like, don't take my shit, right? It's like, it's my money, don't take it. And I think the point that you're bringing up, Alex, is don't look at my shit, right? And it's almost like the 2 things kind of fit hand in hand. I think about any kind of movement that looks into how can I free myself from the government? It's always leaning on those 2 things. It's like, don't look at me, like give me the ability to have my data either private or safe, and then give me the ability to own something in a way that you can't rip it away from me. And so
I like that. I would say even more general version would be individual sovereignty and then collective sovereignty. So sovereignty subsumes, don't take it, don't spy on me, but also I'm allowed to do these things. And then collective sovereignty is a group of people says, we have decided on these rules amongst each other, this binding social smart contract.
Yeah, that's interesting because it kind of, we kind of see this playing out now, with the idea of like what's beyond the blockchain. And it's like, okay, if Bitcoin and the financial side of it continues to keep hardening, how do we deal with, the government not being able to look into your stuff? Or how do you deal with, say, private data in a decentralized way when a lot of, say, a blockchain is built on the idea of being public and being immutable? What are the technologies that start to arise to fill out that second part of the don't look at my stuff?
I think one thing I follow on from Balaji's point is, well, I'm not in the camp of being super bullish on whether or not a government's going to, put Bitcoin as a central bank reserve asset. I think the pain point really is that it gives people a choice of where to take their fiat, right? The reason why you can run the financial system as it is today with all the leverage and whatnot is because you couldn't leave before. And now you have a chance to leave and do something else. And I think that's the point. And that's the problem that's more near term is how do you force somebody to own 30-year bonds or keep your money in the banking system or, escape massive devaluations or whatever if you have this digitally fungible thing that you could easily in 2 clicks buy or sell and get out of the banking system. That's what probably governments are more worried about rather than, okay, maybe I should go and put a hammer to somebody's knee and take all their Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly. They're not care. I mean, it's the government criminal cares about being. We should be concerned more with government criminals than criminal criminals, right? In the sense of they are not concerned that someone's stealing your money; they're just concerned that they can't steal your money. Right, right, and that they can't freeze your account, seize your account, et cetera. And like we saw in Canada, like we saw with, unfortunately, a bunch of other cases. There was something else you said. Oh gosh, okay, keep going. I just forgot to go.
Well, on the point that Andrew was getting to, and Arthur did expand on this, it's not just about like, don't look at my stuff. It's about the ability to basically compose yourself into a different architecture. You can leave that system and exist inside of a different one. And I think that that's a key facet of decentralization as well, is you get the choice to leave something and not be a part of it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, really what it is it's competition for jurisdiction. We're returning to competitive government where people could opt out of their government and so on. And now you can opt out in place by going to the cloud, and then you can also move between states and change, your passport or change your residency or something like that. And just like a monopoly, like Microsoft hated competition, existing governments hate competition. So that's why they're anti. It's not like, all this stuff about, I was talking about this earlier, all this stuff about, is this a security? Is that a security? That's just like a legal fig leaf over, will there be competition for this government or not, right? And that's what they don't want. They want centralized power, and they don't want to have power outside the state.
It's actually, a really interesting point. I put myself in the shoes and I say, okay, if I were to leave, say, the comforts of America or the comforts of whatever country you're from, the things that would seem important to me are, I want to be able to have sovereignty over my money or the things that I hold valuable. And then I also want to be able to have, say, a sense of privacy, a sense of individuality, and I would like to be able to keep myself contained within the container that I move myself into. I guess within that world, it seems that the two things that come up are privacy-enhancing technologies and essentially decentralized forms of currency or stores of value. I guess, how do you see those two things interplaying in either, you can look at it from two standpoints, right? One, where people are forming a new network state, or two, where the global financial banking system ends up folding in on itself and you're forced into needing to rely on these new technologies or a way to protect yourself from, say, a banking system.
I guess the sad part is that most people only really start caring about this stuff is when their stuff gets got. And then they're like, oh shit, that Bitcoin thing makes a lot of sense right now. If I'm, some Russian oligarch and I thought I had a yacht, and no yacht. So I think it's more of like a negative sort of reaction to somebody took my shit and okay, well, this kind of makes sense over here. Versus, I mean, obviously people in this room have positively sought out to like get Bitcoin or whatever your cryptocurrency of choice is, but the majority of people are like, why would I need that? Like, I trust XYZ currency that I have in my pocket. It's worked.
I think you're right. And coming into currency, but then also to, what happened in Canada with bank accounts, it's like you don't really realize that somebody completely controls your bank account until they turn it off. And we did see that in Canada. We saw that happening there, which I think was really the first, considered a top tier democracy to take that route and freeze people out of their accounts. But there is that, you don't realize you need it until something bad happens to you. But along with that, I think that it does show that really the next phase for crypto is that we are making it really easy for the on-ramps to people to come into the ecosystem, whether it's the individuals coming and moving themselves out of the financial system, or it's Web 2 companies that are incorporating Web 3 technologies into their tech stack. That's the building towards those use cases, making those on-ramps easy, driving the adoption, and creating business value in other areas gets more people into the system and builds it. And it's not easy unless you find yourself in that negative situation, or people that are in this room that are all about decentralized currencies. That's the part that will expand Web3.
Yeah, in a sense, it's like sort of three tiers: the media power, the money power, and then the military power. As you go from soft power, just trying to convince with media, and then money power. It's not a gun. But it's not that soft anymore when they're freezing your account and so on. That you're being compelled, but you're being compelled non-violently. And then the third level would actually be attempts of physical coercion. And one way of thinking about it is social media built parallel media networks. And that was a huge arm wrestle over the 2010s. And now mainstream media has been reduced to just another poster on social media. and they're very displeased with that. But it was a huge struggle, and they lost that central point, and now they kind of just talk to themselves, and it was a big fight, but they lost, right? And if the 2010s, all politics was social media, I think the 2020s, all politics becomes crypto tribalism. And the dollar holder becomes just another crypto tribe. And just like the mainstream media, the mainstream currency becomes very displeased with that. Because, in a sense, if 2008 had Bitcoin, you would have seen a completely different outcome if it was at the scale of it, right? Like essentially what 2008 led to was radical de-dollarization movements both within and outside the West, right? In the sense of Bitcoin and Ethereum and so on, whether you call them radical, whether you call them intense, whether you call them passionate, determined, zealous, whatever you want. There's a bunch of people who suddenly realized Ron Paul was right. Remember your thing about after you get got, then you, right? So 2008, a lot of people got. And you should go back and watch Margin Call and The Big Short and so on. Margin Call especially because it gets the somber mood of that time. You lived through that, right? Yeah.
You probably made a lot of money, or maybe you didn't. I don't know.
Wait, you said that you were at the banks during the financial crisis. I was like,
no, I wasn't allowed to trade.
I was like, were you guys pulling the trigger? Or no.
Goldman definitely pulling the trigger.
Yeah, Goldman did. That's true, but it's a huge institution. And the thing about that is, it's something where it's the reason that nobody, quote, got in trouble or really could have is that it was a school of fish. It was like the Soviet Union, right? When the Soviet Union makes a wrong decision, maybe there's some communist who gets in trouble, but the problem was communism, not the communist. And the problem is Keynesianism, not the Keynesian, right? The entire Keynesian system of money printing and so on and so forth, of having all these people make the same wrong decision at the same time, who are you to blame? You can single somebody out, but truly it's a systemic issue, right? It's systemic, Keynesianism.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the real problems in the financial crisis as well, and this is something I noticed when I was in the industry, was that you had the very smart people being regulated by the not as smart people. And so that it was very easy for the banks to go in and tell them this is the best thing, best outcome for the economy and really change policy. But I think,
But the regulators are also bad. Right? So there's dumb bad people and smart bad people. So go ahead.
I mean,
Just bad.
But not so smart bad people are probably worse. But
it depends.
We think they're smart.
Yeah.
Right.
But the decentralization that we did see in the media, I agree with you, is that we have seen a huge shift in the way that communication is happening in the world. But along with that came the centralization of information, and that is still a tool that exists in the government's toolbox. Is that these social media companies are fighting with traditional media companies for control over narrative and all of those things, but the data still is in our realm of tools that we can use against people. FISA warrants to go in and get information from Microsoft or Twitter without telling anybody, that are done in secret courts. This is all things that exist within the centralization of data that has happened over the course of social media coming along. And I think that it's really important because that tool is something that the government could leverage. And maybe it's not directly, going after you at your address, but the amount of data that we've collected and all of these big tech companies and the government has together has really created identities for every person and allowed them to, there's basically a way that we can get into people's minds. We can change them a little bit here or there if we know enough about who they are. And so I see that part of breaking up that centralization is just as important to getting into a decentralized world, because that data should be something that you are contributing to the things that you want to contribute it to, instead of being controlled by a social media network that can do what it wants with it.
I mean, where you're describing, the thing is, we're lucky that the NSA is there. The Keystone Cops, right? The NSA is like both the Stasi and the Keystone Cops, right? They have the intent, but they keep getting hacked by whether it's Snowden or other things. There's many government.
Is that COVID?
What's that? Not COVID. COVID 2.0. So there's many government hacks that have happened, and so they're collecting all this data that they can't secure. So it gets hacked out the back, right? Really, we want privacy over KYC. And but what I am concerned about is a sufficiently smart government, maybe China, maybe something else, that would take all of this data that they've been hoovering up, and then put it into an LLM that is tireless and can put all of your past history together and predict your future actions and so on. We've never seen something like that, right? That is something where even the Stasi was limited by paperwork, They couldn't synthesize all of this information. That is a really oppressive potential that I'm concerned about. We need to decentralize fast enough to make that data encrypted, and I'm not sure we'll get there fast enough. We'll see.
I think you guys bring up a really interesting point. I mean, that is a potentially scary thing. It kind of reminds me of the impetus for a lot of, some believe the impetus of Bitcoin was the 2008 financial crisis, right? I think what you guys are describing is a different impetus, which is, if you have these big governments, organizations that are parsing through everyone's data, is there a way that decentralized technology can protect against that in the same way that Bitcoin was able to essentially fight back against the money system? Are we able to use things like zero knowledge or all of the other aspects of decentralized tech to essentially hedge against this?
I mean, I think technically, yeah, it'll come. The question is, how do you get people to actually use it, right? I mean, if Justin Bieber said everybody needs to go out and get a ZK proof on their phone, fuck, the whole world would have privacy, right? But a bunch of nerds sitting in Singapore talking about like cryptographic proofs, nothing's fucking changing. So it needs to enter the popular culture before you actually get people to use it.
And that is the piece, is that it is hard to build with private data and using privacy preserving technology. And it's even harder to do that in a decentralized way. And that is why we aren't seeing, you need to make it easy. You need to make it the easy pathway for companies or for applications that care about your privacy to use it. And that's the component that is really missing. And the answer to Andrew's question is yes. I wouldn't be building with Nillion if I didn't think that was true. But these techs are with ZKP, MPC, fully homomorphic encryption, this ability to take data, secure that data, but then still run computations on it, so you don't access the underlying data, but you can still use it. Like, these technologies are the ones that will lead that decentralization, because it's not useful just to keep data secure. You need to be able to use it while it's secured otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, I do think, by the way, that there is a large market for privacy, in the sense of, for example, Google Docs, every doc you can choose whether it's shared with this person or shared with the world. Clearly that's quite valuable, right? Who can edit it? Your Signal has a fairly large user base. Obviously your email, that like you're the only one seeing like the whole inbox, all these kinds of things. There is a market for privacy. It's actually quite large if you think of privacy as a subset of permissions, and so who can see? Is it world readable? Is it group readable? Is it world editable, right? So I think if you think of privacy as just a subset of permissions, so not that something's either private or not, but how private it is and how editable it is, then like clearly permissions have a large market. That's A. And then B is, I think some of the stuff with, obviously with ZK rollups, they've shown that the privacy technology is also scalability technology, which is good because that helps develop it further. More people know about it. And C, there's something that I'm tracking, this thing called 0x Park. It's kind of a play on words of Xerox Park or whatever. And they're really making the ZK stuff usable. It's not like an investment or something like that, but it's like a good research shop that might, that's making this stuff usable. So I actually do think it's getting adopted, or potentially get adopted. If you wanted to do a Google Docs on chain, if you wanted to do that, Skiff is trying to do that, they would use some zero knowledge stuff, right? So that's where I think it might come, but maybe I'm wrong, but that's it.
But I think you brought up a good point, Arthur, which is the incentives for things like privacy, private data, they're not the same as the incentives for meme coin or Bitcoin, right? Because for one, it's like I can get rich. And for the other, it's I can protect myself. But then people generally don't really think about protection until the bad guy's at the door, oftentimes.
I mean, we all have a smartphone in our pocket. It's tracking our every single move. It can be rooted pretty easily by a determined, government agent. But we do it because it's convenient and
totally
we like to share cat photos and all that sort of stuff. So
well, that's why the true systemic risk to our space is actually Apple and Google and Microsoft, because it's not the 51% attack. It is the Tim Cook backdoor attack, right? Like Tim Apple can do a software update, and if you disobey Mother Nature, if you guys all saw that clip, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, if you've disobeyed Mother Nature, no more Bitcoin for you. Right? You can just basically, do a wallet scanner and so on and so forth. And if it's technically possible, it may be attempted, and then maybe the answer, it's going to be hard to scale an operating system as big as iOS, or of course Android can do the same thing as well. I think the answer is going to at least be in part political, where if such a seizure is attempted, then the local government would say that's illegitimate, and then it gets into interstate relationships. Basically, we aren't taking crypto seriously enough yet. I think, in terms of thinking about this kind of stuff being weaponized against us. And hundreds of millions of people, like 100 million Russians, kind of experienced this already. They were deplatformed from Figma, okay? Like, you may say, Russia is bad and so on and so forth, but like every Russian didn't order the invasion. There's a lot of just random Russians around the world who are totally normal and disagree with it and deplatform from Figma, right? Or just pick your app. I'm just picking, Figma. So you could just be randomly ejected from this stuff and the thing could be turned on you. And certainly that could mean wallet scanning. And I don't think we've thought about that enough.
Yeah, and I guess a question for you, Balaji, do you think there's a way where we can flip the incentives so that it doesn't require a doomsday thing to happen or a very bad thing to happen before people wake up and they're like, oh, I should think about this stuff more seriously?
So this is, I want you guys to jump in as well, but this is something I think about a lot, which is you have either low probability or a distant, extremely high cost event. And how do you get people to take action towards it? This is the thing that humans are like the worst at, right? For example, okay, we'll get, drug compliance is bad, right? I will, if I take this pill every single day, I'll be fine. But if I miss it, a bad thing will happen to you in the future, but you don't break right away. You don't see the feedback right away. That's the thing humans are really bad at, the distant thing that has bad consequences. So one way of doing it is you make it proximal somehow. You have alarms going off on your phone, things vibrate. There's some way of making it proximal. And one way of doing that is actually make movies about it, right? To make it visceral, because you know what? It's interesting. People have a vision of AI apocalypse. It's easier for them to think about AI ending the world than for them to think about the dollar dying. It's actually kind of interesting. People get less emotional when they think about the Terminator than when they think about like the dollar. It's actually kind of interesting on that. I've poked a little bit on. And so partly that's because we don't have enough movies and scenarios and so on. And it's not so much that like a movie is exactly how it'll happen, is it just gives subroutines for people to think about things. It's like that scene for a movie, if not the whole thing, So that's one way we can make it proximal. Another way, of course, is thank God that crypto makes money. Like it's kind of, because what that is, it's sort of the probabilistic approach to infinity. There's some pricing of that today, right? I mean, this is what you do. You're the man on this, right? Well,
Expectations of what other people think in the future.
Yes,
is how you
exactly.
get rich.
And then propagating that back to today has some non-zero value.
Exactly.
Right? So if there's like so fortunately we have markets, that's another time travel device, where some people believe in a bad outcome or a good outcome, and they price and they pull it back to today, and then that has some present day value. You trade on that.
I think NFTs actually is one way that people are going to understand cryptography and privacy and all that sort of stuff. Like you artist or whatever, and they issue some NFT, now you have it on your phone or your computer or whatever. Somebody steals your fucking Bieber NFT that you fucking paid, a week's worth of wages to get. You're gonna fucking figure that shit out. Best believe you're not gonna let the government come and take your Bieber or your Taylor Swift. Yep. No, thank you.
Taylor Swift, I might agree with you. Taylor Swift, I'd agree.
I think a proximal event that has really juiced this conversation is around AI and LLMs, because we've seen the wave coming through of LLMs and all of the data they've been scraping and creating. And when you think about where a massive amount of potential is in LLM, it is expanding the potential of you as an individual. But then that also means that you have to give all of this data about who you are to an LLM so that it can learn about you. And I think that the conversation is going to expand on, we made this trade for convenience over privacy last time, and everybody knows that now. And we've seen what's happened with that with Cambridge Analytica and all these other events that have taken place. But with AI, we recognize what we did last time, and so the people who are the thinkers in the space are really considering, how much of yourself do you want to give up in order to have an LLM that works as you? And so at the end of the day, like what really is identity? It is how you talk, the things you say, how you speak, how you type, like it's all of these things together. And so figuring out a way to create that, Alex bot, but then also not give all of my information to somebody else I think it's gonna push the conversation forward.
Well, so within every space now, Teal talked about how there's centralized, AI and decentralized crypto. But I actually think you can think of there being centralized versions of AI, crypto, and social, and decentralized versions of the same. So like centralized AI is OpenAI, and it's funny. I mean, congrats to them on making it, but they did centralize it. Centralized crypto is CBDC. Centralized social is Facebook. But we also have decentralized AI, which are like Llama running locally on your computer. And some people have gotten that like model evaluations down to just running on like one Mac M2 Ultra or something like that, which is very impressive a few weeks ago. And we have decentralized, obviously crypto with Bitcoin and so on. And we have decentralized social just starting to get there with Farcaster and Lens, but also actually, even though I'm not a huge fan of it, but there's Mastodon, Blue Sky, Gab. I'm a fan of this. Any individual app I don't endorse, but the space of it, of having lots of different apps. So I think that with AI, the decentralization is kind of already underway, because fortunately there's a Microsoft model and there's also a Linux model, and that Linux model in AI, I think is getting some traction. So.
And I also think that you're right that there are the two elements, right? And bringing the two together can actually be a way to build as well, where we take centralized models and we add a decentralized component that exists as a layer on top of it, so that we get the benefits that we're looking for on something like privacy of the data, but also utilizing the central model underneath.
Yep.
And I guess you have the company perspective of like, if you're not Microsoft, you're like, well, how do I compete with them? Then support the thing that destroys Microsoft.
Exactly.
Right?
That's right. And that's great. Again, markets, there's economic interest, right? Just like all these people who weren't Microsoft crowdfunded the Linux Foundation, essentially. Everybody who is not OpenAI or Google could and is kind of releasing these models or crowdfunding these models and so on. So.
I guess in some ways we're still fighting against human nature. Like, you're still fighting with it. And what I mean by that is, Arthur brought up the point, we all have iPhones in our pockets, right? Even though they're tracking us. And I think if we take, say, AI or LLMs, in the fork in the road where there is a Facebook 2.0, this centralized AI thing that's sucking all our data up in an even bigger way. And then the other pathway is a decentralized version of that. But if the decentralized version of that doesn't work as conveniently or isn't as easy to use, there's still the human nature for a lot of people that will just grow the stuff on the right, the centralized version of it. And so I guess, how does technology catch up so that the decentralized version is at least as equally easy to use as the bad Facebook version, per se?
I think we have to really capitalize on people's desire to get rich, right? That's the whole point of a lot of these blockchain token models, is like, okay, participate, buy the token, you're a stakeholder now, you're going to be an advocate for it, you're going to talk about it all over social media because you want your token to go up if more people use it, right? And I think this economic model really does work in these sorts of systems, especially in the long tail of stuff where you're not the Kardashians who make so much money on Instagram. They don't want to use another solution. Like, why would you take the risk?
Right.
But if you're some like no-name fucking artist, like a news platform where there's decentralization and you're going to make more money in the long run, and this going into it, you're going to be a much bigger vocal supporter. And you need just one or two standout people to really just make it. And it's like, oh, okay, this model works. I like it. I like making 80% of my revenue versus 1% or whatever it is today.
I think the technology underneath it does have to add some sort of value that is unique to the decentralized part of it. We need to look at decentralized technology as not just a version of Facebook that is in a decentralized world, but as it has to offer an additional value, and that can be through monetization. It could be through how profits are shared. There's all kinds of models that work there, but it needs to expand on the underlying value. Because a good example, I'd say, is BitClout, where amazing traction. A lot of people went in there. A lot of people had bags, made money on the bags, but then the technology that underpinned it wasn't nearly as good as Twitter. And so it just did not get sustained adoption. And so the tech does need to keep up with it. The tech needs to have something unique to it that really holds people into it if it's going to compete with a centralized company.
It's interesting. I don't actually, at least, I don't think the failure there was, and I guess they're still going, I actually thought it was technologically interesting, but socially it was just too commercial. It was too much, everything has a price, and it wasn't ideological enough. There wasn't a meaning there. There wasn't something that kept people going. So it's interesting that you think of that deficit. Maybe it was also technological, but I think it was at least in part ideological. And you can overcorrect on that, of course. There's been many, I think Vitalik actually also wrote about this from a different angle, but there's been many open source projects like Diaspora, if you remember that, long time ago, tried to compete with Facebook by being decentralized before crypto. And actually, the project didn't go anywhere. There's lots of these idealistic, non-commercial kind of projects that are very idealistic. And then you have projects that are too commercial, and they're a turn off for that sense. They're meme coins, and it's just like, who gets in, who gets out type things. I don't like that stuff, but I know people like that. And then kind of in the middle is a sweet spot where you kind of have the right combination of idealism and commercial incentives. So I think that balance wasn't there.
I'd agree with that, but I think also that just being basically a Twitter competitor, with the different economic incentives. And yes, it was very much pump and dump, and there were a lot of games that were played, and I think that that was overall a negative. But when it came to the decision of, am I going to spend time on BitCloud or am I going to spend time on Twitter? Twitter was giving people more. It just had more of that sucking in. The audience was there. The way that the algorithm is presenting information to you was there. Like, these things are fundamental to getting people who are outside of the moon bags trying to manipulate the system.
Yeah, so on that topic, I think the competitors to Twitter that have gotten some traction are not those that actually have a different technology, but a different community. For example, Gab or Parler or Truth Social on the American right, or Blue Sky or Mastodon on the American left, or Farcaster and Lens within kind of our crypto community, are all things that really, I think the fundamental difference is who the community is, which also relates to who the system administrator is, right? That administrator is like the ruler of that digital realm. And now we're kind of, we tried to think of these things as neutral utilities. Like, Facebook actually was once called a social utility by Zuck in the 2000s and 2010s, because he wanted it to be a neutral pipe. And then it was just, everything was just forced to take sides in the late 2010s and became more and more explicitly political. And actually what Musk has done, where he's just like, yes, I am running Twitter and I'll make arbitrary decisions, but Elon moderation, in my view, is better than just faceless bureaucratic moderation. It at least shows that there is somebody in charge, and you kind of can infer where the judgment is if you know his positions, and human brains are built for that. So it's actually a more predictable law in some ways. And so I think these communities, that's another reason for decentralization, is people don't want, that's the other part of human nature. Yeah, they want convenience, but they also want choice.
And so if we, let's say we take that and we expand on that further, and we do end up in a world where we are forming these new decentralized communities, and we're doing it to essentially break away from some of the bad incentive structures. How do you stop other human natures, such as the desire to want to have more power? To your point, when Facebook first started, it almost seemed incredible, right? This idea that you had this big social network and it was kind of free. And then suddenly you got the CEO who becomes more and more of a centralized figure power. It becomes more Darth Vader by the day. I guess some would argue that that is almost like an inherent human nature, where if you organize people, even into, say, a new kind of government, a new network state or whatever, how do you stop someone from essentially showing up and starting to centralize power?
So what did you guys?
Oh, I was just saying, like, I'm not in the social realm, but back to like Bitcoin. Like, imagine if only one editor had all the Bitcoin. What would Bitcoin be worth? It'd be worth zero, right? Because it's all about transferring it between people. That's how people get paid at the end of the day. So I think depending on how these consensus mechanisms have the economic gains within them, they automatically will enforce a destruction of the entire system if one or very few entities control everything, because then what's the point of having it?
This is a really key thing. If somebody centralized control of Bitcoin, it wouldn't have any value. So their hands would go through sand, but of course they might want to try to just do that just to destroy it. But, it is true that they would capture nothing. It wouldn't be an economic motivation.
Yeah, I think that that's this is the aspect of decentralization that I really like, is the ability of the community to essentially be part of the governance mechanisms for the platforms. And you've seen that in Bitcoin. It's the ability to enter and leave the architecture. And in an application like that, where it is more focused towards something like social media, where there is a desire for power, it's the ability of people to, I guess, remove themselves and their participation in it completely from that application.
So I guess the idea of stepping outside the box, right? You step outside the box potentially by migrating to cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin. But how do you, in this new world, how do you move something like your identity outside the box, something that is typically controlled by these central governments, if you were to create a new community or you create a network state?
Scan an orb by Altman. We've got a solution.
Do we rely on
Right.
things like that?
So,
Yeah.
well, it's a great question. I mean, I think the fiat currency to cryptocurrency bridge turned out to be more important and more profitable and more difficult than anybody would have thought. Like Satoshi didn't account for that. In the early days, people thought the Bitcoin economy would just sort of bootstrap by itself. Like the exchange rate only came up, I think, like 2 years in or something like that. Though Hal Finney did think it would be worth $1 million or $10 million early on. There weren't exchanges until like 2 years in or something like that. Maybe 1 year, and Gox was like 2010 or something. So the thing is that if that bridge was very valuable, the fiat identity to crypto identity bridge will be very valuable. and the fiat stock to crypto stock bridge will be valuable, and the fiat X to crypto X bridge will be valuable for many different values of X. In fact, I think you could basically do an entire fund thesis just on that. This is actually one of my fund theses, like several years ago. I'd be investing on that. So to your point, all of these offline pieces of identity, like your physical form, like your passport, like your driver's license, like X and Y and Z, all of those can be ported on chain with, like, for example, attestations that are in your ENS, right? And then you can take those and do something with them. And Coinbase is trying to do something like this, I think, with Base, right? Where, Coinbase identities, because they've got all these people who went through all this effort to load up their passport. It's a huge pain in the ass to do that stuff, right? You're only going to do that if you're going to get a significant benefit out of it, right? So all these identity documents, if people so choose, they could potentially say, okay, zero knowledge proof that I'm from this country, or I have this passport that Coinbase is attested to, and that's on chain. And then you can use that to log into a system. And you can be as privacy protecting as you want if you use zero knowledge to do that fiat identity to crypto identity bridge.
Yeah, and I think we can utilize technologies like ZK and MPC and other privacy enhancing technologies to help be that bridge. Going through somebody who is a central validator, bringing that information into decentralization doesn't necessarily have to be on chain, but it needs to be in a place where you can interact with that data and prove things about yourself. And I think it's going to go on-chain data or decentralized data. When we think about identity, it's going to actually expand beyond just like the passport or the driver's license. And there's going to be elements of reputation in there. There's going to be elements of credentials in there, and really keeping that in a place where it is, secure. It's not just available to anybody, but also usable so that you can do validation. You can, make sure that the person that's accessing whatever application is through a wallet by doing like biometric authentication, that's going to be critical components of bringing that into Web3.
I mean, bringing that together with what we were talking about with AI, it's almost interesting, right? Because in the analog world, we tend to think of our identity as a license or a passport. But, let's say there's a world where AI does continue to expand, and you've got this LLM that knows everything about you. And maybe it's the LLM that's feeding you all the data and you're asking it questions. Suddenly that LLM probably has a pretty good idea of who you are. And you could even argue that that is your quote unquote identity in some way. So it'd almost be important to keep that safe as well.
Well, it's funny because, Singapore has something called SingPass, right? Which is, you do have like an ID card or something, or a passport, but you also have this app that is basically like a digital passport, and you can log into banks with it, and you can log into, like, Stripe supports SingPass and so on and so forth. And I've thought that actually will become the definition of citizenship. In the same way that, if you have a Google account, you have permissions. I can edit this document, view this document, comment on this document. It's kind of like you're a citizen, you're a permanent resident, you're a tourist visa. Your permissions to interact with the country are like a function of that, digital document. And what's interesting is the digital stuff is both easier to fake with AI and harder to fake with crypto than that physical document, right? Because the photo is really easy to fake, but the digital signature becomes impossible to fake. So we kind of have radically increased the variance here. And I think what's going to happen is every physical document you get issued will start to have some NFT-ish or some crypto-ish thing associated with it, which shows it's actually real, like some other level of verification that's not simply, for example, people would verify gold with a magnetometer or something. Now people can scan it and see that it's actually real.
When you guys think about the technology that underpins essentially what you just described, do you see it on the blockchain? Do you see it off-chain? How do you kind of see that working in a decentralized environment?
I think it's going to be a competition, right? Everyone's got a different idea. No one really has a clue what is going to be the easiest solution or what different stakeholders are going to allow. But it's going to take time. It's not going to be this instantaneous thing where this one company has divined what it is going to be. But I think maybe companies that have a large amount of users will try different things and find out what's the easiest, and that will be the solution. Because again, human behavior is very unpredictable.
Yeah, I think we're going to see a combination of technologies coming in, and because they'll be better at different things. So, the immutability aspect of being connected to a blockchain is going to play a role. MPC and its ability to keep data that can still be processed, but is in a highly secured frame, and be able to do things like authentication and biometric authentication, like that's going to have its own role. So we're going to see a combination of different technologies coming together to solve that.
Okay, great. And interestingly, some believe that the match that sets off this fuse and opens up this future is either the collapse of the banking system, and with all of the interesting macro things that are happening now, I feel like we'd be remiss not to talk about those things, especially with Arthur here. So interest rates are continuing to rise. Inflation is running away. How does that play out into essentially bridging into this decentralized future?
Again, it's choice, right? It's I have a bunch of bonds. I need to find someone to buy them. I'm not going to cut my spending, so I'm going to keep issuing the bonds. And if the general public says, okay, I don't want to earn 5.5% in treasuries, I want 9% or 10%, whatever the rate is, and the government says, no, you're getting 5.5%, shut the fuck up. Keep your money in the banking system. You know, well, no, hold on a second. In 2 clicks, I just went to Coinbase and I bought Bitcoin and I withdrew it from my wallet, right? And so that's the fight right there. And that's why you see BlackRock and all these companies wanting to get into crypto, because those are just essentially arms of the state. And you can pick your country and find the large asset manager. That's why they like crypto. They need to control the entry and exit of money from the system, more so to control it from ever leaving by letting you buy these financial products that never actually give you control of your actual finances. It's just another thing that you rent from the financial system. So that's the fight right now. And it's going to be interesting to see how quickly this BlackRock ETF gets approved.
Yeah, it's funny because it's both good and bad for all the reasons that you mentioned. Good because it also societally legitimates it on a level that's impossible for, I mean, people will keep quoting Buffett on, rat poison squared or whatever, right? But BlackRock has even more weight than Buffett, So it's something where it's got a good and bad. It does obviously increases price probably, but it also increases the amount that is just captured in this fake vehicle that you can't redeem. It's like the Truman Show of Bitcoin, where it's like trapped in this thing and you can't break out of the walls, right? But
a really good way to stop competition is just basically to try and acquire it, right? So we'll give you the opportunity
Passively
to buy
too.
Bitcoin, yeah.
And you're doing it to yourself. It's not like they told you to buy it.
Don't go hold your keys and own your own tokens. Let's go ahead and buy it inside of the BlackRock portfolio, and that way your Bitcoin is there. You've got the upside.
On the other
It's
hand,
regulated. It's safe.
if you think of the BlackRock coin, BlackRock Bitcoin, and the free Bitcoin, right? The BlackRock Bitcoin. I mean, here's one model, right? The ETF pushes up the price, but it also pushes up the price of the free Bitcoin because maybe there's some discount or trading, but they're kind of track, right? And then they do seize or freeze or limit withdrawals of the BlackRock Bitcoin, but that's just like seizing. That actually might boost the value of the free Bitcoin upon a seizure, depending on the dynamics of how that situation plays out. So it may be something where if you're an institution and you thought you had money there, then it ends up like the Russian sanctions and you don't have the money, but the free people actually do benefit from it, right? That's a possibility as well.
Yeah, let's keep saying that.
Yeah.
I like that.
But it's interesting. You see almost we were talking about incentives earlier and how on the crypto side, use incentives with tokens to get people to do things. You're almost seeing the governments playing with the same kind of incentives on the other side, where it's, yes, let's create essentially Bitcoin within the system, and it almost kind of gives them a way to keep money within the box.
We're really fortunate that DC is dumb. China, Beijing is smart. DC is like the IQ is being drained out of DC, right? And this is the opposite of the early 20th century. This is a whole long conversation. I'll post a video on this, but early 20th century, there's this thing called the brain trust, right? FDR got all these smart people to go into the government because centralizing technology was ramping. That was like the centralized century, and it kind of culminated in like the 1940s, 1950s, where you had giant gigastates slugging it out, right? And then the transistor being invented kicked off this decentralization trend of transistor and personal computer and smartphone and internet and cryptocurrency. And now we're seeing those political entities that was set up on the basis of centralized technology like mass media and mass production getting hit by this decentralization of media, which they weren't built for. They weren't built for 500 competing, basically tech warlords. Like Elon has this giant following, and have you seen the scene of where Elon goes to the Air Force? You guys seen that?
No.
Okay. Google this, where Elon is welcomed by the Air Force. It's deafening. They're like, raw, like this. I've never seen anything like it. And the question arises, who is the real commander-in-chief? Right? Who's a true commander-in-chief from the armed forces, right? Is it
Kamala Harris?
Huh? Go ahead.
Is it Kamala Harris?
Kamala Harris, of course. Yes. So basically, whereas in China, what they did is they, like obviously, like I'm not an endorser of the system, they did see ahead. Like they saw how dangerous to their power social media could be, and they censored social media early, and they made the gelded, wings clipped, CCP controlled versions early, right? They kind of banned crypto, and then they're like unlocking it in Hong Kong in like a controlled version. And what I've heard is something where it's like they'll allow you to buy it with HKD, and HKD is like the unlocked version of the RMB, sort of, right? And so you can kind of control it and see it, but then they don't allow most of their population to get out there and so on and so forth. So they have set up these kind of levers of control because they actually take the thing seriously. Whereas DC was always very dismissive of a new technology. Remember, social media was a fad and it was a bubble and it was a joke until it became a threat to democracy, right? And everything is like that. Like crypto is a fad and a bubble and a joke and a scam. And then we're going to enter the phase where it becomes a threat to democracy.
We also,
Not if Larry Fink owns it.
Right. Yeah, so that's the thing. It's really interesting because it will split. Because it's a fundamentally political thing, it will split. We're already seeing, and this is what I'm seeing at least, dissident individuals and dissident states and provinces like within the US or outside the US are the ones who are adopting cryptocurrency because it gives them power against a centralized state. It's things that are off the map like El Salvador and Bhutan and Palau and stuff like that. It's Dubai, obviously. But it's also like Florida and Texas. Texas says Bitcoin shall not be infringed. But it's also Chinese liberals, right, getting their money out of the country, right? So it's like everybody who's like on the outside and is smart and mobile and nimble versus this giant lumbering centralized Goliath is kind of how things are setting up, at least in the West.
we also benefit, the buildup in government centralization through the 40s, and then the downward trend from there. We've also benefited from the fact that jurisdictions have also become more powerful to sit alongside the U.S. So the U.S. was really the only place to play in the 40s through the 70s if you wanted to participate in financial markets and you wanted to be in a very robust and developed economy.
Yes.
It had to be in the U.S. But now so many other jurisdictions have caught up, so we have the benefit of it's not just what the U.S. decides.
This is such an important point because in 2008, how many people knew how to the 2008 crisis? You were in banking, okay? Most people, but fintech, crypto, that didn't exist back then. Now, there's PayPal, but like at the scale it does. Now, 15 years later, there's like millions of people in crypto and fintech. Like every country around the world, in Brazil, they have PagSeguro, and there's GrabPay in Southeast Asia, and there's UPI in India, and there's Alipay and WeChat in China. So like the ability to set up a payments network for both consumer and enterprise is like well understood, right? It's something that a lot of us have done, multiple times. And so that was not a skill that existed before. And moreover, if you think of the dollar as a network, and that's a good way of visualizing it, like Powell is the system administrator and he can deplatform you just like Zuck can. Now there's all these parallel networks that have arisen. And so the rest of the world has gotten much more sophisticated on finance, and they, in many ways, the ACH SWIFT system, the only thing it has going for it is incumbency. You wouldn't pick that from scratch among all the different payment networks of the world.
But I think a lot of the other governments also have the same issue of the U.S., right? They're
Yes, they want to pick
insolvent
themselves
as well.
Well, right. So that's why we
Which
go
is
to,
great because
Well, though I actually think degrees of insolvency do matter, right? Like if they have gold and if they have
natural resources or whatever,
yes,
yeah,
natural resources, exactly. Then you can get everything gets zeroed out, and then you redenominate in oil and gold and stuff like that. That's right.
Okay, great. So, to wrap things up, clearly we can see that the slingshot is pulling back right now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of shooting into a number of different directions, one on the finance side, one on the technology side, even shooting up into how communities are forming, how technology works. How do you guys, as an open-ended question, how do you guys see the next 3 to 5 years playing out on these fronts? And in line with the topic of today, what are the technologies or the decentralized technologies that kind of really pique your guys' excitement as we look towards the future?
I think my mental model is sort of a 2026-ish top in markets as governments around the world are basically funding themselves by issuing the most amount of debt that we've ever seen in human history to save themselves from going bankrupt. And I believe that that's going to lead the biggest bull market in every single risk asset that we've ever seen. The unfortunate part is what goes up must come down. And so the latter half of this decade could be quite dicey. And then the question is like, what do you own when, if there's another Great Depression or some sort of global war? I don't know. I haven't really thought too much deeply about that. I'm trying to focus on the party in the next 3 years. But in terms of technology that's super interesting, it's like whatever infrastructure that can be invested in now is actually going to be battle tested on the decentralization front when you have a desperate set of governments saying, my citizens want something different. I know it's better for them, but it's not better for me. So I'm going to come try to stomp on this. And that's when this technology is really going to be tested.
Yeah, I would agree on the debt and money printing side. I think that that's going to be a huge facet of what happens over the next 5 years, is that governments will just continue to fund the spending that they want to do with debt, and we're going to reach those points where we start to have those crises happen. It's probably not going to be in the U.S. first. I think it's going to be in other jurisdictions, but we will reach a point where the debt will just be unsustainable for governments. But that's the pathway that they've chosen to go down now, and so I think that that's going to be definitely a resurgence for cryptocurrencies as people look for ways to not participate in currencies that are getting devalued and getting destroyed by money printing. But I'm also, on the technology side, I'm super excited about the tech that is opening up new potential for people outside of the Web3 ecosystem to get involved. Anything that is going out there and creating more accessibility, more usability, more ability to incorporate decentralization in the tech stack is the stuff that I think is really interesting, because companies on that side, they want to participate in the potential of what crypto or Web3 projects or dApps can do. They just need a really easy way to become a part of it.
Yeah, so I think 2008 was about like your trade, like what trade you made, the Big Short, and so on and so forth. I think that's part of it for this thing that might be coming up, that probably is coming up. I think I share Arthur's view on I don't know the exact contours of it. I have some hypotheses, but I think it's going to be allocation, location, organization. What does that mean? So allocation is what are you allocated into? I think crypto, and I think actually the safest fiat asset in the world is probably SGD, Singapore dollars. Why? Because U.S. banks, Fitch is going to downgrade not just 70 banks, but including J.P. Morgan, if you saw that, after they downgraded the U.S. So U.S., let's leave that out for now. Switzerland, Swiss francs aren't what they were after the Credit Suisse debacle and Russian sanctions. So then you have like Dubai and Hong Kong, and they're very interesting as financial centers, but they're both still pegged to the dollar. They may be unpegged. I've been hearing rumors that Hong Kong dollar will get pegged to the renminbi. Okay, there's a possibility, but it's not yet, and that has its own issues. And so then you're kind of, you sort of cross-sublimation, you're kind of left with Singapore, which has an independently managed currency. It's a financial center. So allocation, I'd say, insofar as you hold fiat, I think SGD might be the best. Obviously, I have no SGD bags or whatever. Just like it's a neutral kind of thing.
Just live here.
Yeah. That gets
biggest bag.
That gets number two, right? So location. I think that this is just one of those things where your physical location does matter. You know what else thinks? He's not into crypto, but Dalio thinks like in very much the same way. He's been writing many of the same things. Like he says in a very academic way, like your location could be a risk factor, meaning there could be guys with guns coming to your location if you're in an unstable zone, if there's civil unrest, right? Which happened in much of the world in the 20th century. It was like a huge, communism came to much of the world. There was huge amounts of chaos everywhere other than like the US and Canada and Australia. A few places, Anglo places, were left immune from that. So chaos, unfortunately, is like the normal state of things. So allocation, location, where do you choose to kind of set up? When, it's kind of like buying Bitcoin when it was $10 was cheap. Like getting to whatever country or place you want to get to now, like all of the CBI stuff, RBI stuff, meaning like residency by invest, all that stuff, the demand for it is spiking. Those charts aren't, they're public, but they aren't like put in a nice coin market cap. Maybe somebody should do that, right? But those, like the demand for changing location is rising. Even within the US, people are fleeing California, fleeing New York, Florida and Texas, right? You've had this very significant migration that's happened, especially remote work has helped, Starlink has helped. Everybody, it's like a game of musical chairs where you're picking where you want to be when the music stops, right? And then that's the third, which is organization. Like what's your tribe, right? What's your group of people? Because Steve Jobs had this great email from a few years ago, which was a few more than a few years ago because he passed away, okay? But he said, I don't pipe my own water. I don't chop the wood for my table. I depend on other human beings. They're phenomenal species, and I depend on them. And he's right. We're social animals, right? As much of a sovereign individual as one wants to be, you also need a sovereign collective. You need a tribe that you can trust. You just can't possibly grow your own food and do everything yourself, you know? So that's the third is what's your organization? Like what tribe are you part of? And figuring that, building your tribe, finding your tribe or founding your tribe, I think is the third part.
Okay, thanks guys. Arthur, Alex, Balaji, appreciate you guys coming out.